Hey Waffle Gang, I do hope you are well. My name is Mark and today we're checking out some more Reddit stories. If you do love a Reddit story, why not consider hitting that like, subscribe, maybe that notification bell too, and let's crack on with today's first story. Much love, guys. Today's first story comes from True Evil Incarnate and says, would I be the arsehole if I called out my mother-in-law for literally putting my husband last? There is a trigger warning on this one for drug abuse, domestic violence, descriptions of medical emergencies with blood, and seizures. Whew. My husband was hit by a car while on his e-bike 2 weeks ago. No fractures of any sort miraculously, but has a mid-temporal trauma subarachnoid hemorrhage on his right side. He is supremely lucky to be alive, and his 2-day stint in the ICU was filled with onlookers of the man who was crushed in a car but only suffered a minor laceration and brain bleed. This man is very anti-hospital and finicky and insists he's fine. But his mother and I disagree because he has permanent optical nerve damage due to an extremely rare brain aneurysm. It wasn't an aneurysm, I just don't know what to call it because it doesn't have a name yet. He had as a child. The doctors said that puts him at even higher risk than if he were normal. I think he should go back to the ER to get another scan and suck it the frick up. And these symptoms are why. He's still having high blood pressure spikes. His average has been 160/100. Highest spike while sitting was 210/150. Heart rate averaged around 60, but he had sinus bradycardia when he was released with a max dip of 39, 3 hours before he left. Possibly due to the med they gave him, currently not on the list for some reason. Ever since stopping the weak prescription of Keppra, his headache has now turned into an additional severe toothache that makes his brain feel wiggly. The headache that originally was in the middle right of his brain where the bleed is has been traveling around, specifically the back section of his brain. He's been sleeping abnormally long. Usually it's 4 hours a day, but he's been sleeping 10 to 14 hours a day sometimes. His sense of taste has been funky and some foods are disgusting to him now, even though he loved them. Concerning the toothache, it keeps switching from his tooth to his brain and it's so bad he's been breaking the rules and taking 1,200 milligrams of Tylenol every 6 hours, rather than the capped amount of 650 milligrams, and he says it doesn't help at all. He's also been hammering Oragel, Oragel, into his teeth, literally saying it's not helping, but it helps. Cognitively, he's okay. A bit slower than normal, but that's kind of to be expected with a head injury. No tingles or numbness, passes all sensory tests and reflex tests. His wrist is starting to hurt. He crushed the back of the car with it, so I suspect it's got a buccal fracture at least. I had one as a kid. The main worrying thing, the back of head headache that won't go away, and the fact that he's still getting very dizzy in weird situations. Against my judgment, he hopped onto my bike last week to make sure he can still mentally deal with biking, and he surprisingly has been very good on it, and only has an issue once he stops. He gets super dizzy when he's staying still and is perfectly fine when moving. When he took a shower last night, he wasn't dizzy at all, but became very dizzy as soon as the water was shut off, and he stopped moving. The ICU said the dizziness should have gone away after roughly a week, but this is week 2 and it's not getting any better. Am I wrong for wanting to force him to go back at least to get it looked at? In our area, the nearest time to see a basic PCP is a 3-month wait. And my neurologist, only outpatient one in our area, has a 6-month waiting list for new patients. Also, if we do go, how can we convince them to not give him any IVs? His veins and arms are sensitive and still bruised from his original stay, and he doesn't want them prodding at him just to do a basic CT scan and wrist x-ray. Many thanks in advance. Sorry for the length, I can only provide other info if needed, and if you all want to see the damage to the lady's car, I'm down to put it in the comments, but only if there's an actual want for it. Also, this isn't an emergency post. Understated neurological emergency signs. I have neurological issues myself. I just need someone to back my concerns because me and his mother aren't convincing enough apparently. Edit, just realized I left out personal changes. Usually, he is a generally angry person. He has been unexplainably sad since the accident, crying at the sight of the simplest things like a crushed water bottle our kittens were playing with. Also, his newest symptom is popping and crackling in his right ear. And all we've heard about so far is the symptoms that her husband is going through, which, all sounds very traumatic brain injury like. So I assume coming up, we're going to see the turn of the mother-in-law soon. But yeah, absolutely. With all the symptoms that you said, if I was in that situation, I'd be encouraging or telling any of my loved ones, you need to go to hospital, jump in the car, let's roll. Not quite along the same lines, but like with my dad, when his first symptoms of mesothelioma came up, look, we didn't know what it was, but he just started becoming more and more breathless to the point that, you know, when he was going across to his local shops, which is about, you know, a 10-minute walk away, halfway across, which my dad at the time, he used to walk everywhere. He used to love going out, walking, talking to people, but halfway through he'd have to have a sit down because he was so breathless. And I was like, come on now, this isn't right. I went straight to the doctor, and the doctor pretty much surprisingly assumed straight away that's what it was. But my dad at first was like, oh no, I don't need to go see a doctor for this, it'll go away, blah blah blah. And it's like, nah, come on now. So we'll cover one comment from this one. Wise Gal says, the things you're describing all sound very typical for a traumatic brain injury, which is what he had. The headaches, sleep pattern changes, and personality changes are common. I tell my patients to expect these things to be present for weeks to months after the injury, with slow improvement during that time frame. Also in this category are the cognitive changes. The Tylenol use you reported is very concerning. Doses higher than 4,000 milligrams in 24 hours can cause liver damage. This isn't the mild type either. Tylenol overdose can cause irreversible and fatal liver failure. Please don't let him take that much in 24 hours. If he has now new worsening confusion, weakness on one side of the body, new difficulty walking, difficulty speaking, acutely worsening pain, or you're unable to wake him up, you need to go to the ER immediately. It's rare, but rebleeding in TBI patients does happen. So the next bit, the update, or part of the update, it says, would I be the arsehole if I called out my mother-in-law for literally putting my husband last? That must have been like the prequel. But Opie comes in with the accident recap and says, while he has been home recovering, he's been having lots of various symptoms, along with some bottled mental health decline that he thinks he's hiding. This man is usually very stoic, calm and collected, and usually if anything on the angry side, but he's been crying at the drop of a hat, left and right. Even he knows it's odd. Ever since his accident, I've been in contact with his mum, 56 female, keeping her updated as she lives across the country, and couldn't be by his side like I and his brother were. This is important because when my husband was a very young child, he had an extremely rare blood clot occur that caused permanent optical nerve damage in one eye, and his mother is the knower of that whole period of his life, as she spent every day with him for a full year in the hospital working to get his sight back. His previous clot made this new bleed very dangerous, so keeping my mother-in-law in the know was/is a must. My brother-in-law only hung around for the first 2 days and then gave up on caring and left. He's an arsehole. I'll sum him up shortly. And at some point a week and a half after the accident, my mother-in-law stopped answering texts about the updates entirely. My husband blew it off as his mum thought no news is good news as a better option. But I found it dickish. Suddenly last week she texted saying she and her partner were coming to visit this week. When I talked with her sister who lives near her, she said my mother-in-law had been frantically trying to find cheap flights to come and see my husband. Said husband got very excited visibly, but then blew it off and said, okay, cool. I know he'd been missing her, as she only moved away due to some trouble between our families that resolved itself in an odd way. No hard feelings between anybody, just weird living situations. He's also been so emotionally unstable that I think he just needs her around. We've been together for 11 years and he's nowhere near alone, but she's still his mother nonetheless. Plus she's a wonderful woman in many ways, so she's great to have around when you feel like shit. She didn't tell us a day, so when she texted me this afternoon suddenly saying that she was driving back from her sister's house, would be visiting my brother-in-law, getting a motel and stopping to say hi. You can say we were both surprised and both feeling a mixture of happiness, but also sadness. The sadness is because of her choice of people to visit. The airport she landed at is 30 minutes north of where my husband and I live. She decided instead of immediately coming to check on her son, who is lucky to be alive, to instead travel 2.5 hours north from the airport to visit her 3-year-old granddaughter at her sister's house. My brother-in-law and his girlfriend had severe drug issues, so my aunt-in-law has custody of her for now, until they get their shit together. Then she left there to travel 2 hours south back towards us, to visit my brother-in-law, then get a motel in his town, then maybe come say hi if it's not too late for her. My husband said this was fine, but I could tell he was upset because he started tearing up. He kept blowing it off, but it made me mad. And 5 hours later, as I suspected would happen, my mother-in-law called to say that she was tired from driving and her plane trip, and that she was going to go to sleep and see us whenever tomorrow. My husband quietly broke down, denying his emotions and saying he was fine, he didn't know why he was reacting this way, yada yada. So would I be the arsehole for telling my mother-in-law she's a fucking arsehole, made my husband cry, and while I understand she's stressed out herself dealing with my brother-in-law and his bullshit, that she needs to stop putting my husband last to placate the piece of shit she should have aborted, that her firstborn son that she spent so much time and effort taking care of almost died and wants his fucking mother to the point of crying like a baby, and that directly doing everything but coming to see him broke his heart to bits. The reason I word it that way is because my brother-in-law had a massive second child complex where he thinks my husband is the favorite because he was born first, and due to his childhood medical issues, he used that as ammo to my mother-in-law as to how my husband is a supposed favorite. Note, he's 31 and he's still doing this shit. It doesn't help that she's a massive pushover who lets this shit happen in the first place. But she always does what brother-in-law says and bends to his will. Every time she visits, we only see her once for a few hours out of a week-long stay, because my child of a brother-in-law wants his mummy to himself, and she caves. My husband likes to keep to himself, so he says it's fine, but I can tell he thinks his brother is the favorite, and it makes him cringe internally and seethe with butthurtery. I don't know when she's going to be here tomorrow, but I really want to lay into her. My husband says leave it be, she's got a lot on her plate. I call bullshit. She's literally on vacation right now. There's nothing on her plate. She should have come to see him first, whether she plans on spending a whole day with him tomorrow or whatever. It doesn't matter. She said she missed him and desperately wanted to see him and hug him. But when it came down to it, she'd rather go cuddle with a baby who barely knows her, then travel to a different location entirely to visit that baby's shitty father instead, and not even show up at all. I think I'd be in the right by calling her out, but I think I would also be an arsehole because she's a usually wonderful woman who has helped us so much throughout the years, is dealing with a stupid man-child and trying to help him get his daughter back, which is saintly itself considering he doesn't deserve anyone's help in general. She doesn't deserve someone yelling at her, but I can't just sit here while my sun and stars breaks to pieces. Also, since my own mother's death in our previous relationship, I've been a bit touchy on the subject of how mothers and children should treat each other. But I don't want to make my mother-in-law cry just because I'm being a dick. If anyone can give some advice, that'd be swell. I'd like to be able to say something tomorrow, but I'll wait and see what the internet says because my echo chamber is too small at home. Thank you all and happy scrolling. Edit, in case anyone wonders why I shit on my brother-in-law so hard and doesn't like the use of my word junkie. Well, I apologize, but my brother-in-law is not a good person from the get-go, and drugs do not help. Explaining all the horrible things he has done is its own story itself. Also, the past 4 times she's come to visit is because of brother-in-law asking her to, along with giving him lots of money, pay for multiple week-long trips for him and his little family to visit her. But not us, no. Opie comes in with another update and says where I may be wrong, my brother-in-law relatively didn't do anything wrong this time yet. I don't think he specifically asked her to come to him first or anything, and I believe he's relatively behaving like a human for the time being, so punching him in the face would be out of the blue and dickheadish. Plus, he's been in therapy and trying to get his life together so he can get his daughter back. Where I'd be right, my brother-in-law is walking garbage in stolen shoes. To super sum it up as a person, he's narcissistic, manipulative, he has many deeply rooted mental health issues, multiple severe decade-long drug problems, not just habits, and acts as if you aren't there doing him a favor and kissing his feet. Literally, then you must hate him. And he's going to jump off a bridge. He even goes to the bridge and everything, but he's bluffing and has admitted to that. He has gotten me, my husband, and many others arrested and put through ridiculous court ordeals due to my brother-in-law's schemes. He is, in my opinion, responsible for 2 girls dying due to drug overdoses. He's gotten his current girlfriend addicted to drugs as well, and they've both lost their daughter because she's overdosed. Luckily, she survived. I think it's a blessing because she's out of that environment and away from brother-in-law who is extremely violent and often hurts his girlfriend. I have a permanent neurological disorder due to a fight I had with him once where he headbutted me and cracked my skull open. He also takes advantage of his mother like crazy because she's a saint and can't say no. He's stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from over his lifetime and constantly claims favoritism towards my husband to get money, cars, plane tickets, free rent, etc., etc. Meanwhile, my husband maybe talks to his mother once a month to say hi, and that's it. This favoritism claim is due to him being the second child who wasn't wanted. In reality, it's the opposite. My husband is an oopsie baby of hippies, because my husband had a childhood medical event that made him the family favorite. And the list goes on and on. This dude still fights over Pokemon cards with my husband. We've had to hide all of his childhood stuff in case my brother-in-law comes over, because he will start stealing if he's not being watched or things aren't hidden well enough. Like, am I wrong for wanting to punch him? I think all of that history of garbage, and trust me, I've had a front row seat to some awful behaviors from this man lower than any creature on this planet, and it makes me want to punch him in the face, or have a duel or something. But then he's been good recently, been making pretty good progress with therapy according to his girlfriend, has drastically reduced his drug use, and while still up to shenanigans, hasn't been pulling anyone else into them at least. But then my mother-in-law went to go see his daughter first, and then him afterwards. Then went and got a motel and went to bed after telling my husband and I, fuck off until tomorrow pretty much. So she spent the whole day doing stuff for or with my brother-in-law, and the whole point of her coming to visit supposedly was because of my husband being in a horrific accident that he's lucky to have survived with only a brain bleed. And she wanted to see him and hug him. I guarantee that only happened because my brother-in-law whined about some sort of shit and she went running to him. She's a wicked pushover because of my brother-in-law threatening to off himself left and right, so all he has to do is slightly hint that he's upset and she runs to placate him. I suspect this because when my husband was in the hospital, you could see the dollar signs jumping from my brother-in-law's eyes once he heard there was a brain bleed, but then got angry and left once the hospital said they were sending my husband home, and hasn't talked to us since. It's been 3 weeks and he hasn't answered a single text. What are your thoughts? The punch is metaphorical for the record. If I were to attack him, I'd probably get killed. I'm not insane. The top comment on that one says, you buried the lead of this piece of crap headbutting you so hard you have a permanent neurological disorder. I can't understand how you were brave enough to spend 1 minute with him. I thought that as well, because at the first part, I was going all sorts of different directions. I was thinking maybe that I was still against brother-in-law, but I was thinking that he was like maybe a bit of a neglected child because the mum was always looking after OP's husband, like because of medical needs, etc. So brother-in-law was always cast to the background kind of thing, like the opposite of what we see in some of these stories pretty much. But then this guy nutted you to the point of a neurological disorder is madness. And all the way through when you kept saying that you're going to punch him, I was like, no, do not punch this dude, man. But OP comes in with another update and says, yesterday, my husband and I waited all day for my mother-in-law to call when she was going to come over and say hi. I had to text her at 1 PM because I was starting to get pissed off she hadn't said anything yet, and her response led me to punching a wall without thinking. She said that I was assuming she and her partner, were out to lunch with brother-in-law, sister-in-law and their daughter, who they got to have a surprise visitation day. She said after lunch, when my niece went home at 3 PM, she would come see us. I was furious, but whatever. My husband was distraught, but again playing it off. We eventually, around 5:30 PM, we got a call from my mother-in-law saying she was coming over. Well, finally. We made a plan for her to come pick us up so we could get pizza for dinner. We can't drive, and I laid out a whole idea my husband came up with to get some pizza, go see a movie, and maybe go play some pool afterwards, because that's a pastime his mother loves. Well, nope. Mother-in-law said she needs to return to brother-in-law's house, so she'll be picking us up to get pizza, and then we're going to go see brother-in-law and sister-in-law afterwards. Oh, of course. So we went with that plan for the sake of not starting an argument. When she showed up, she was nice enough to come to our apartment and say hi to my dad who lives with us, but wanted to leave right away. The only reason we didn't was because my mother-in-law brought her sister, Kay, 60 female, who hasn't lived in the area or even visited for 30 years, but came with mother-in-law to see my husband specifically. She sat with my dad asking a bunch of questions, looking through all the hospital paperwork and accident reports, etc. Honestly, stuff his mother should have been doing, but wasn't, and was instead just chatting with my dad, trying to scoot everyone out the door. After a while, we left and got pizza, and mother-in-law took us to brother-in-law's place. We spent 2 hours sitting there and talking about brother-in-law and how awful his life is. He quit his job because it sucks. His car is broken again. He wants this and that but can't get it because everyone keeps fighting him, yada yada. Meanwhile, my husband was getting sicker and sicker looking, and Kay and I were constantly bugging him to sit or drink something, or even get ready to go to the hospital because he didn't look good at all. He was starting to get confused by stuff. Huge red flag. Now here's where everything spiraled. Kay suggested that maybe we take my husband home at least because he was starting to sway in his seat, and she was guessing maybe he was just tired. My sister-in-law though started freaking out, saying we need to call an ambulance. See, my sister-in-law had a severe traumatic brain bleed happen years ago due to circumstances, and she is also a super empath. According to her, she could sense something was super wrong and that my husband needed to be seen right away without delay. Now my husband usually would be refusing viciously at this point. He hates hospitals and especially hates ambulances, but he wasn't saying anything, so I knew something was wrong and started making the call. My mother-in-law and brother-in-law seemed maybe a little worried, but they kept playing it off saying, he's probably just tired. He probably needs to rest. It wasn't until my husband threw up all over the floor that they got the fucking picture. I sat and handled the phone call while Kay and sister-in-law tended to my husband. Now, I don't know what happened because my back was turned when I was on the phone, but the next second I heard a wicked loud yelp and then the sound of crashing glass, and lots of yelling. According to Kay, what happened was my sister-in-law went to hold my husband's head as he was starting to go limp, so they were transferring him to a laying position. And my sister-in-law ended up taking his head and laying it on her lap because their floor is hardwood and she was afraid it'd hit his head. Totally valid worry, and I thank her for it. My stupid brother-in-law didn't like that though, and without thinking about anyone but himself, grabbed my sister-in-law by the hair, picked her up by it. She's tiny so it's very easy, and threw it into their coffee table. Multiple things happened at once and I can see it in my mind's eye in slow-mo. First, my husband's head had dropped to the ground and Kay wasn't close enough to catch him, so he ended up hitting his head. At this point, I turned around and saw sister-in-law in a bloody pile of glass. Mother-in-law holding brother-in-law back from trying to attack sister-in-law while my husband was having a full grand mal seizure on the floor beside them about to get stepped on. Panic doesn't even begin to describe the feeling I had. Even though unfortunately, due to my having epilepsy, I understand the no seizure protocol. I was in panic noting the time and all that jazz. I didn't even notice the EMTs and police show up. They heard the crash on the phone and assumed to send police as well. The ambulance scooped my husband when his seizure luckily stopped, rushed into our chosen hospital and scooped my sister-in-law off with my mother-in-law to go to a separate hospital closer by. The one my husband was brought to is a level 4 trauma center and is better equipped. Kay drove behind us in the ambulance because apparently she's acting mother now, which at this point I don't even care about anymore. So now my shitty brother-in-law is in the police station and has finally been arrested for his actions. Not sure if my sister-in-law will continue with that, as this is not their first rodeo. Nor do I know what will happen with my niece now. My mother-in-law is staying with my sister-in-law so she's not alone, but she should really be swapped with Kay, and even Kay thinks so too. I asked Kay what's been going on with mother-in-law and why lie and pull such a ruse. And she said she has no idea what's going on, but something does seem strange as this is totally out of mother-in-law's normal behavior. We don't suspect she's using drugs as she has pretty severe heart problems, but something's definitely up. But that doesn't matter at all to me right now. I did end up saying something to mother-in-law over the phone last night. I, as calmly as possible, just let her know my husband has been taking her sudden neglect and told her hopefully this is a wake-up call to stop putting all her time, care and attention to a wife-beating piece of crap. She's actually his long-time girlfriend, but Kay still stands. Her response was stuttering and then silence. She's supposed to be here in half an hour, but now I don't even know if that's going to be a thing, because supposedly brother-in-law is going to be released sometime this morning on bail. So I assume she'll run off to be with him instead. Sister-in-law said that no matter what, she'll walk here if she has to. Concerning my husband, he was brought straight past the ER directly to the ICU. After being shoved through a CT scan, they said he had a rebleed and it had grown 2 centimeters more than it was before, putting a lot more pressure on his brain, hence the seizure. I knew it was a risk, but it's awful to watch your universe convulse uncontrollably. I know my husband watches it happen to me constantly, but it's very surreal being on the other end of the situation. We're currently waiting for any news other than bad news because so far it's been nothing but bad news. And if the bleed doesn't stop, they'll have to fly him to the big city nearby to one of the bigger hospitals to be prepped for surgery. I'm freaking the fuck out, but there's nothing I can really do at this point but be here for him and divulge every bit of info, anyone might ever need about him. I don't want my husband to die. If he dies, I literally won't be able to continue living in this world. So hopefully he lives and his mother comes to fucking see him. Edit, forgot to mention my mother-in-law was only staying in town for 2 days. That second day she was in town was to be our only day with her. The next day she was planning to take brother-in-law and his family to the beach, and then travel up north again for the rest of her stay to be with her other sister. This trip is to see you line was horseshit as I thought it was. Now I don't know what her plans are. Next update. Hello everyone, I wasn't expecting such a turnout of well-wishers and concerned readers, and I appreciate everyone's comments of concern, advice and overall support. It has made time go by, rather than be at a standstill. Now for the update, which will hopefully answer some concerns and questions you all had. Shortly after my last update, my husband went in for another CT scan and things were looking good. No growth of the bleed whatsoever, so he was on a 6-hour watch until his next CT to see if he could be labelled stable again. He made it 2 hours before having another grand mal seizure, luckily only lasting 2 minutes total. They weren't sure whether to give another CT right away due to a possible cluster, so after an hour or so he went off for another CT. They also prepped the helicopter in case it was needed to fly him to the bigger city an hour away, so they could get surgery there, as the hospital we were at wasn't equipped for that. Turns out that the seizure opened the hole and now the bleed was fucking massive. It had reached 5.3 centimeters and was leaking towards his ventricles. My husband was somehow conscious and his eyes were open, but he definitely was not all there and could barely speak. He did recognize me though, and he was able to remember and say our special goodbye that we say to each other before they took him off to the helicopter. I wanted to go with him, but they told me it'd be better if I could drive because my weight would slow them down and they needed the space. I called bullshit but didn't want to fight them too much and left with Kay as I'm not able to drive. On the way to the city, I called mother-in-law to see what was going on with sister-in-law and informed them of the situation, as I had directly been ignoring their texts for the most part because I'd been staring at my husband for hours on end. Mother-in-law freaked out and said she was already on the road and that she'd be on the way to the city as well. She also informed me sister-in-law was with her and would be coming with. We then took the phone to inform me brother-in-law was staying in jail for domestic violence and drug possession, as he had his daily dose of shenanigans in his pocket at the time of his arrest. Sister-in-law also let me know that she was fine and she just needed some stitches around her eyebrow because some glass cut her face. By the time I got to the hospital in the city, my husband was already in surgery. The plan, I guess, was to stop the bleeding from the source itself and try to remove some of the built-up blood because it was creating so much pressure on his brain. He had another seizure on the helicopter ride and the bleed was even bigger, although they never told me the size, or I didn't even soak that in at that point. But at this point the only thing that I could do was wait out the surgery and see what would happen next. I'm no stranger to waiting for close family to hopefully survive awful and life-threatening situations and surgeries. It's like a curse that followed me since I was 4. Death follows me like a plague, and other than my husband, I only have my dad left as living family. I prayed death would take the fucking day off. My mother-in-law got to the hospital about half an hour after Kay and I. She was in hysterics and apologizing to me and Kay and begging the doctors to let her go into the surgery room at first and acquiescing when I'm told it was too late to see him. I told her she needs to tone it down and she's lucky I've even let her know where he is or what's even going on considering how she's been acting. And I honestly spent a good hour sitting there tearing into this woman. I loved my mother-in-law and felt so hurt that she left my husband high and dry to cater to a monster. I hated her for using our softer sides against us to drag us to my brother-in-law's house and into a living fucking nightmare. She listened tearfully and ate every word I dished to her. I didn't feel better afterwards whatsoever. She was an absolute wreck and I could see it. Years of worry for my husband, dread and regret, sadness and understanding. She looked very broken and it made me feel so much worse. She helped us so much for years. She housed us for free while we struggled for work, fed us with no questions, gave us rides and support in all times of need. Hell, this woman taught me to crochet, which is my favorite thing to do in this world besides my husband. Insert quirky laughter here. I'm currently too tired. So when she responded to me with what she did, I honestly wasn't surprised and a little pissed at myself for not seeing it in the first place and yelling at her as hard as I did. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law have been working for the past year to get my niece adopted by my mother-in-law behind brother-in-law's back, along with all of our backs as well, because they wanted as few people to know as possible for the safety of my sister-in-law. When my sister-in-law overdosed a year ago, and they lost custody of my niece, I guess when she was taken away, there were lots of stipulations to get her back, and while my sister-in-law has gone through recovery and everything beautifully, my brother-in-law was uncompliant and making the process complicated for no reason. He also was completely unresponsive and is still unresponsive to all correspondences and calls from CPS, so did not know any of the proceedings, even though they sent him forms to sign. My mother-in-law had flown them out to give them a vacation to hopefully restart the mentality so she could get them started on a new path to life and hopefully get my brother-in-law to become compliant. And I guess she made the decision when my brother-in-law responded by stealing her car to roam around the city to find drugs and came back belligerent and abusive. So all the secrecy of this specific trip was because things were being finalized this week. The paperwork was signed the day of what I would call the incident, and my mother-in-law wanted all of us to get together that night so she could break the news to my brother-in-law, and so we could hopefully celebrate. She feels horrible for what happened and even somehow feels bad that my brother-in-law still doesn't know yet because he has the right to since he's their father. I want to be there when he's told and his brain implodes honestly. I'd die of laughter in the parking lot. I asked her why she bothered and why not report brother-in-law sooner since she knew what was going on, and she responded that she didn't want to mess up the adoption. I told her that was extremely irresponsible and that sister-in-law was at such high risk. The sister-in-law assured me that she wouldn't have had it any other way and that things have worked out perfectly. Well, other than my husband. She didn't mean that maliciously, she meant it factually. Nobody planned out for my husband to decline so badly all of a sudden, which led my sister-in-law to go into helper mode and which made my brother-in-law jealous. According to sister-in-law, he suspects she's cheating with my husband, which led to all of the events that unfolded until now so far. After all their explanations, I honestly was just numb. Didn't know what to feel or think. I still kind of don't. I'm horrendously angry at both of them, and they both admitted that it doesn't excuse their faults in this. Nor is my mother-in-law absolved from her crimes of abandoning her son in his time of need, and that they've been saints since to repent. But I don't even know if I can be mad at them anymore. I know that they needed to dance around my brother-in-law, so that's understandable. I just wish they let us know. They didn't because we are usually naturally low contact, so they didn't see the point in saying anything. Bad excuse, and now my husband gets to suffer for their incompetence. I told my mother-in-law and sister-in-law they're lucky I don't press charges against them, and they agreed that's fair, and that they deserve whatever crap comes their way. 8 hours after going in, my husband came out of surgery alive, thank fuck. They supposedly closed the source of the head bleed, but there's a lot more blood than was originally realized, and it created a lot of pressure. And I honestly don't care to type out all the medical bullshit they told me, but pretty much due to the scar tissue and permanent damage that was already present on my husband's optical nerves from his childhood clot and aneurysm, the pressure from the bleed created a massive strain on said optical nerves. And with the way things are, my husband is blind and will be for the time being until the inflammation from surgery and bleeding is absorbed, hopefully. My husband opened his eyes yesterday afternoon, unable to see entirely. He previously had 1.5 eyes worth of sight and now he has none. He only remembers getting pizza and saying goodbye to me. Everything else in between was empty space. He's having a lot of neurological issues so far obviously, and his speech is extremely slurred, but he is alive, cognitive, and has motor function. He remembers me and his mother and remembers our special words and handhold. He's luckily still my husband so far. This is not his first time being blind and he's surprisingly okay with it for now at least. He says it's kind of nostalgic in a way. I didn't want to worry him, but he kept asking questions, so I told him everything that's been going on from the beginning to the end. He fell asleep as I was telling him the story, and when he woke later, when the nurse came to check on him, he asked for the rest. I know he needs to be resting, but my husband is the type of person who needs to know. He's an informational index that needs to be constantly fed, and it kills him not to know things and have answers withheld from him. I'm so happy he's alive. Mother-in-law is extending her stay and will be staying with me in the city along with sister-in-law, and they're paying for my hotel. Kay will be leaving in 2 days when the vacation is supposed to be over, and she can't miss work. She has a high security job. We're all waiting for news on brother-in-law and on the hospital that did the original surgery when my husband was a child, to see if anyone from the team might still possibly be in practice and have some insight as to where to go from here. There's a lot of personal things I left out because this case is very rare, and as this teaching hospital in a frenzy. My husband's childhood event was a rare situation, so this is something that's never happened before, so far from what they've told us. So Curse says to the OP, there was still no need for your mother-in-law to force her injured son to be around brother-in-law. Adopting her grandchild is obviously important and perhaps the secrecy was necessary, but there was no need for her to make your husband make that trip, especially given that she has seen your husband already have a traumatic brain injury in childhood and therefore knows better than most how dangerous they are. You have to live with the fact that she almost killed her son and her excuses don't make up for any of it. You, however, are doing an awesome job. Please remember to be kind to yourself in order to fully support your husband. You have to prioritize taking care of yourself too. This is going to be a long process, so get good habits starting now. Eat well, get lots of sleep, and feel no hesitation about keeping any negativity far away or being selfish. Even if that means telling mother-in-law to leave or letting her stay. OP adds a little update and says, howdy everyone who has found this. I'm using Reddit as a diary at this point. I love reading the comments and venting the events out to someone other than family. As my husband and I don't have friends, as we're both pretty introverted. Not much to say so far other than my husband is still in the hospital and is still blind. They contacted some of the old neurologists from his childhood but haven't gotten anywhere with research yet. The bleed hasn't grown but the swelling hasn't gone down much either. His blood pressure has been stable at least. My mother-in-law had to go home. She was not happy about it but was planning to move back across the country to stay nearby rather than move my niece to her house, as was the original plan before all of this. She really had called the realtor to look at a house in the area as well, so she's all in on this, I guess. Therefore, she needed to go back with her partner. He's been with her the whole time since she returned with sister-in-law from the hospital to pack up their stuff and get things settled. I've been keeping her updated. She'd been gone for 3 days so far and is due back sometime next week or so. My niece will remain at my aunt-in-law's house until she returns. My sister-in-law is staying with me from now on. I haven't been home minus to grab some stuff from my husband, so she's been staying there to help take care of my dad. He's elderly but still mostly independent, and my cats as well. Honestly, she's been an absolute saint. Luckily, her job is very flexible, so she's been able to take lots of time off for now while she helps, which I severely appreciate. Plus, this all keeps her mind off what's been going on with brother-in-law. I don't know, I've just been working with my husband and therapists and doctors every day, while also managing everything legally with the lawyers regarding the accident that started all this mess and all that jazz. It's been oh so fun. I'm fine though. No need to worry about moi. I've been enjoying this time with my husband the best I can. He's still definitely suffering many neurological complications that keep changing day to day, so it's hard to tell what's going to happen next. So we're just taking everything one day at a time. Oh, and brother-in-law's first trial was rescheduled. He tried to kill himself in holding when sister-in-law contacted him to let him know what was going on with my husband. So they have him in some sort of mental health evaluation hole for now or something. Sister-in-law didn't explain it well, and I don't feel like researching right now. He doesn't know about my niece yet either. Sister-in-law decided to wait until he's seen someone to talk to like a therapist. I told her to just get it over with, and she's considering it. I'll post again if anything happens. Happy doom scrolling. OP had one more post, which says, am I the arsehole here for laughing about hearing awful news about my brother-in-law? This is hi there. I posted about my mother-in-law a little while ago asking if I was an arsehole for being mad at her for ignoring my husband after he almost died. Then around the first 2 paragraphs was like summing up what we've just read, and then continued, my mother-in-law ended up coming back after going home to sell her house, etc, etc. And she'd been living at a new apartment and she got in the same building my husband and I live in with my dad, so she can stay close. My niece is absolutely loving life with her so far. My sister-in-law is also staying with them for now. Not sure what her plans are. Now my brother-in-law, and where I might be an arsehole. He was put in jail for throwing my sister-in-law into a glass table during the incident and having a large amount of fentanyl on him at the time of the arrest. When he was processed, I guess they told him what was going on with my husband. Last my brother-in-law saw. My husband was having a seizure on the ground, and he tried to kill himself somehow. Well, they put him into a mental health hold for a couple of days, and then he had court and they found him guilty, and he's supposed to be serving a good chunk of time. Well, nope. My sister-in-law eventually broke the news to him over the phone that mother-in-law adopted sister-in-law, that his brother is blind and he's possibly at fault, so on and so forth. Not sure how sister-in-law laid it out, but if she was rude about it, I don't blame her. But apparently brother-in-law couldn't handle the news and again tried to kill himself in jail. He also mostly succeeded and is now sitting in hospital getting both of his wrists rewired pretty much, because he ripped his arms, apparently on a partially open grate. Sister-in-law showed up about half an hour to tell me. I barely left the hospital since my husband got to this one here. I couldn't help myself, and the first thing I did was hysterically laugh for a good 30 seconds. To me, it's hilarious justice, and that piece of shit deserves so much more. But sister-in-law got mad at me and told me I'm an arsehole and stormed out. My husband also thought I was being an arsehole. I retorted she shouldn't have brought such news to his fucking sickbed, and that his brother needs a massive dose of reality. Now my mother-in-law has been texting me saying sister-in-law is super mad at me and doesn't want to go feed my cats, which fine, my dad can, but I can't understand why she's so upset at me. It's ironic justice, and I love that shit naturally anyways. My mother-in-law even told me I'm a mega arsehole for laughing. So am I? Well, yes, mental health issues are extremely important. I cannot feel sympathy for the piece of shit who self-entitled his own brother into blindness after beating his girlfriend for trying to help during a medical emergency. I imagine that laugh is more like a stress relief, some kind of relief like that, because there's so much going on in your life. Everyday life is exhausting, right? But then dealing with what you're dealing with at the same time, your husband in the hospital, not knowing what's going to happen, you're having to deal with all sorts of paperwork at the same time, dealing with the communications between your mother-in-law, sister-in-law, what's going on between them, other things like your cats at home, and just everyday life, getting food and everything compounded, it's got to be extremely stressful. So I imagine that's just like a stress reaction more than anything. I've laughed at some weird times. Like, you know, I always talk about grief because what I went through for the last few years, losing various relatives and stuff. And there's been some times like, and I'm not trying to take over OP's story at all, I'm just trying to relate in some way. But like the day, I can remember the day when we lost my father and I turned up to his house and my brother was stood outside and basically just said, you know, he's gone. And I gave my brother a hug, went up to see my dad and say goodbye to him. Gave him a kiss, all that sort of jazz, and then went downstairs, and me and my brother were just sat in the back garden. And I can't remember exactly what was said, but we just burst out laughing, and we was sort of laughing in the back garden. And I remember another family member coming and go, "What the fuck are you two laughing at?" You know? But like OP, it was like all the stress up to that point, watching everything that happened and dealing with all the medical stuff and just dealing with our own jobs and lives and all that kind of thing. It was some kind of release, some kind of grief, you know. And going off as usual, basically what I'm saying is I wouldn't say you're the arsehole in that situation at all. But whatever going forward, I'm wishing you all the best for yourself and your husband's recovery as well. It sounds like an absolutely terrifying situation to be in, and I really do wish you all the best. But now I'm going to turn this one to you guys. What do you guys make of this situation? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Just a huge thank you for being here today, getting involved in the story. Your love, your support, your time always means the absolute world to me. So thank you so much for being involved, and I will see you in the next one. Take care and much love.